Hello, comrades. Revolutionary greetings from France, greetings from Supernova, Communist Review, and the French section of the Anti-Imperialist Front. We warmly welcome the Panafricain Counter Summit in Nairobi against imperialism and against the attempts to revive France-Afrique. France-Afrique is a neo-colonial apparatus which constantly attempts to reassert itself in new forms. In recent years, significant changes have swept across the African continent, revealing a renewed capacity for struggle amongst the masses in several regions, as they continue their fight for a second independence. Since 2022, the French imperialist armies have been driven out of the Sahel, breaking the status quo that had once lasted 6 decades. This is a historical event of immense significance. Across the continent, from the Sahel to Madagascar, genuine Pan-Africanism is making a comeback and forms part of the global revolutionary movement. We also know that this is only a first step. For a liberation strategy to be victorious, it is necessary to link the struggle for anti-imperialist democratic revolution with that of the struggle for socialism. Let us recall the clear words of Kwame Ture. Anti-colonialism is nothing without anti-capitalism. Since colonialism is merely a branch, an aspect of capitalism, therefore, if you are an anti-colonialist, you must be an anti-capitalist, if you are logical in your thinking and actions. If you're an anti-capitalist, you must be for socialism. Capitalism cannot unify Africa. The contribution of the revolutionary forces in countries dominated by American, European, Zionist imperialism is essential to the reconstruction of the communist movement. Activists from the radical left in Europe would do well to learn from the African struggles, from their determination, from their implantation within the masses, and from their construction of the revolutionary tools of party and front, just as they would also learn well from the resistance of Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and Iran. Currently, the imperialist centers are experiencing a crisis in hegemony. The power they once wielded to impose their control over global markets is now slipping. They are also going through a crisis of legitimacy. In the West, in the heart of imperialism, the bourgeoisie can no longer secure significant consensus to continue governing as before. The imperialist bourgeoisie's response to this crisis is a policy of warfare in the external sphere, coupled by the tightening of control over the domestic sphere. Even in the imperialist heartland, the cracks are opening up, unveiling the imperialist propaganda for what it really is. The people can sense it. The world order is shifting. On the world stage, we have witnessed bombing campaigns, sanctions against the dozens of nations, tensions over the control of semiconductors, energy corridors, and sea routes and rare earth minerals. These escalations are a clear sign of a declining imperialist order so frantic to maintain its control that it is now willing to bypass the means of legal mediation and diplomacy had once sought to establish in favor of more direct aggression. Power is weak when it must show its fists, and it no longer has the promise of the American dream to fall back on. The Euro-Atlantic Strategic Program of the imperialist bourgeoisie was formulated by Marco Rubio in Munich on the 16th of February 2026. As Trump's Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, he is the architect of the US's policy for territorial reconquest of Latin America. Speaking before the European leaders, he talked about initiating a new century of Western dominance, one that would plunge the world backwards into colonial darkness. Rubio openly praised the historical legacy of slavery and colonialism and lamented what he described as the post-45 retreat of the collective West under pressure from the communist movement and the anti-colonial liberation struggles. European leaders gave a standing ovation to this idea of the recolonization of the global south in order to limit China's development on the BRICS independence project. He calls for the restoration of Western power against the forces of civilizational erosion. Such is the project and aspirations of the bourgeoisie of the 21st century. What is the role of imperialist France in this situation? Let us listen to a statement made on the 14th of April 2024 by General François Contre, Chief of Staff of the French Army between 2017 and 2021, who had previously served as the head of the Prime Minister's military cabinet, as well as commander of the Combined Arms Tactical Group GTIA-2 in La Côte d'Ivoire. Our destiny lies in the Mediterranean and Africa. Our destiny is being decided right now. We will return to West Africa in one form or another, including militarily, to defend our interests. France, like the rest of Europe, is rearming with a budget of 413 billion over the next 5 years. Its objective is clear: to turn its weapons towards Russia, while also attempting to regain lost ground in Africa. The fact that France has been forced to withdraw its troops and military bases in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Senegal does not mean that it has abandoned its plans to control the region. This year, France has already strengthened its military cooperation in Benin and the Côte d'Ivoire. In March of this year, the chiefs of staff of the armed forces of these three countries met in Benin under the pretext of the war on terror and the fight against proxy warfare. This presence is being challenged in the region. Some 1,000 tons of uranium claimed by France are said to be stored in Niamey Airport, where an attack occurred on the 28th of January of this year, reportedly carried out under the banner of jihadist groups. The destabilization continues. It is a struggle for the reappropriation of wealth and the choice of economic partners. What should be the position of an anti-imperialist here in France? Evidently, it involves supporting those who resist French domination openly and without reiterating the familiar anti-coup narratives. When a political takeover in an African country is genuinely patriotic and anti-imperialist, it becomes a categorical imperative to support it against the waves of hostility and imperialist propaganda. Since the wave of formal independence in the 1960s, imperialist France has transformed its colonies into new colonies by using the concept of France-Afrique, therefore presenting itself as a model of freedom and human rights and a friend Africa. The African comprador class has helped to secure French domination. France has exploited the ethnic, linguistic, and cultural diversity of the African countries by imposing French as the sole official language in 10 African countries and as a common semi-official language in 10 others. France transformed 15 African countries into new colonies. For decades, it controlled their strategic resources, particularly their minerals. 7 out of the 9 French-speaking countries in West Africa use the CFA franc, pegged to the euro. France has had complete freedom to intervene within its sphere of influence in Africa. It has created a military to protect French nationals, to prevent or support coups d'etats, to crush rebellions, to restore order, or to support hand-picked African leaders in 15 African countries between 1967 and 2011. Until recently, it was France that decided who was in power across much of French-speaking Africa. It used methods similar to those employed by the US in Latin America well after the Second World War. After the 1990s, this near-total political control was masked by a democratic charade. Imperialist France, despite having been driven out of many of its former colonies, is likely to retain its control over the Côte d'Ivoire, Gabon, Djibouti, and Chad for some time. Today, imperialist France is undergoing a constrained strategic redeployment towards East Africa, the Mozambique Channel, and Kenya. France is an imperialist country with a long colonial and neo-colonial history, whose power is in crisis, and lacking sufficient technological and industrial means to overcome it quickly. It is a nation where measures of preventive counter-revolution are being tested and implemented here. Without structural changes, imperialist France will continue to oppress Africa. But the first signs of change are already unfolding before us. Our role is to fan the flames of resistance until imperialism is extinguished so that a real alternative can be born. It is for this reason that we support yes. But there is also a struggle to be waged within the heartland of imperialism itself. Military rearmament programs are being pursued at the expense of the maintenance of social guarantees. It is therefore the very same imperialism that threatens the dominating nations abroad that undermines social and labor rights here at home in the imperialist metropolis. Even if the repatriation of surplus value back to the imperialist centers may co-opt a certain social strata in order to contain class struggle, imperialism ultimately provides no benefit to the popular masses. The opposite is in fact true. There is a strategic convergence of interests between the proletariats in the imperialist centers and the peoples of the dominated countries. The task before us is how to reconstruct these political forms capable of affirming this unity, starting with the uncompromising struggle against the forms of colonial racism that are rampant in France. The greatest contribution that revolutionary forces in Europe can make to the struggle of the dominated countries is to fight to rebuild the communist movement, whose aim is to establish socialism within the imperialist core. Let us not forget that this was the task Fidel Castro set out to European activists, who came to ask him how they could help with Cuba. The struggle against the plan for a new France-Afrique and struggle against the corrupting influence of a NATO worldview upon the left here is part of this perspective. Long live international solidarity amongst the peoples. Long live the resistance of the revolutionaries of Kenya and the peoples of Africa. Down with French imperialism.